Welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast, brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, your host and president of a management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. The Igniting Impact podcast is an opportunity to share what our clients and our partners do daily to make a difference in the world. And this season's theme is all about change. Changes in our work, in our systems, in our communities, and within ourselves. This year, we are looking at ways to approach, manage, and adapt to change on our projects, teams, and in our organizations. So today, I am glad to have two guests to our podcast. We have Abe Mendoza, who's the director of the San Joaquin County Department of Child Support Services, and Matt Sautter, who's their Child Support Industry Director at Public Knowledge. Thank you both for joining me today. Let's start by just getting to know you each a bit more. And let's go ahead and start with you, Abe. Can you tell us a bit about your professional background and what you do for work today?
No, absolutely. So after I graduated college, Sacramento State, my main goal was to become a police officer. But due to the economy at that time, it just didn't pan out. And so I was kind of stuck. What do I want to do for the rest of my career, at least the next few years to get me through? I can pay my bills and, college loan and things like that. And so I saw an interesting opportunity with San Mateo County Child Support Services here in California in the Bay Area. And I started there as an enforcement caseworker. And I was there for about 4.5 years. And an absolutely great place to work. Loved every minute of it. And really got to understand casework and how to deal with people, relate to people, negotiate with folks, and just talk to everybody from all walks of life. And from there, I went over and promoted as a child support supervisor to Sautter County, which couldn't be more than the complete opposite of San Mateo County. Sautter County is more agricultural-based community, where the Bay Area was in the middle of Silicon Valley. So different clientele, different income levels, different needs that the community needs. And so Sautter County was really my starting point as a leader. And there I learned a lot of what not to do as a leader and learned some valuable lessons there in Sautter County. But it was a great experience nonetheless. From there, I then moved on to state child support, so state DCSS, and I served in various capacities there. And so I first started as an AGPA, which is an Associate Governmental Program Analyst. Such a long governmental word for the public sector, but there I worked in policy, intergovernmental, and I did a little bit of stint in training, and then I went and progressed to manager one position, again in training in change management, and I'm actually certified in pro-side change management, which is perfect for today's topic. And so what I learned the most was how to come out of my shell. As a change manager, you have to be out there and visible, and work with sponsors, communicate well and often and timely. And so from there, I stepped into an executive role at State DCSS as a regional administrator for everything north of Sacramento. So all the counties north of Sacramento, all the way up to the Oregon border. I love that job. I thought that was going to be my dream job. I made it to where I wanted to be, and I was happy. But one thing that I've learned in my leadership journey is I'm happy but never satisfied. And it's always that yearning to do more. And so a position came open in San Joaquin County for the director. And I was like, you know what? Why not? Let's give it a shot. And here I am today, almost 3 years later. And it's been an amazing journey getting back to the local level and really seeing the differences that we make in the community by the decisions we make at the local level, with support from the state and CSTA, of course. It's been a fun and rewarding journey, and I wouldn't have thought that almost 17 years in, I would still be in child support. But I'm glad I am here in this industry, and it's been really rewarding.
Good, and no regrets about not going the police route.
No regrets at all. That's for sure. I can be more effective in this position here, and I can see the difference more and more.
Good. And what made you decide to get a pro-sci certification? I'm curious. So you were doing training in change management? Is that where that came about?
Actually, I was doing training just on the state program
Okay.
to internal folks at state child support, and then some training regarding certain technology changes or policy program changes to the local child support agencies. And so in order for me to kind of take that next step, I really needed to network, and I was more of an introvert. And so I learned from other leaders in the industry that you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so I really stepped out of my comfort zone and went into this change management assignment, which was supposed to be temporary. And at the time, former director David Kilgore just joined the department. And so we had asked him if we could get certified in pro-site change management, and he was all for it. And he saw the value of what change management can bring to an organization. And that we didn't have that at State DCSS. And so got certified, and the next step was, well, I can't do this alone. Can we have a few bodies, few for full-time staff? And we were able to hire, I believe it was 3 to 4 full-time analysts to help with change management around the entire organization. And to this day, they're still going strong. They're providing presentations at the CSDA conference. And so I think without taking that leap to change management, I don't think I would be here today. And for me, that it really taught me that in order to succeed or move up the ladder in any career, you have to take a risk. You have to take the risk for yourself, because if it's not going to be you, it's going to be someone else.
That's great. That's great. All right, Matt, tell us a bit about you and what you do and how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to be here today and sharing this with you all. So, as Abe was sharing about his background, it was like that resonated very much with me, Abe. And I'll tell you why here as I share my background. So, I went to college and I studied public affairs and public administration, largely because I knew I wanted to get into public service somewhere, right? The idea of a police officer crossed my mind at a point, in various other fields. And I also got into the public affairs, public administration side, because all my friends were doing business administration. And I always loved doing something different. And I knew I wanted to help people and really be involved with the public, like directly. And so out of school, I found a job for a support enforcement officer with the state of Washington. No idea what it was or what it really entailed, and no idea that it'd be the career field I would stay in for a long time. And I took a step out for a minute, but I've come back. And I'll tell you about that journey. So I started with the state of Washington as a support enforcement officer, so really a caseworker within the Division of Child Support Services there, working cases. And then I got involved with training within our office in the state of Washington. There's regional offices, districts across the state. And so I was within the Vancouver, Washington office, and then eventually got in with the state roles and working with grants and special projects and really doing anything I could to help. I remember I got involved with the project as we moved offices and planning this move and the structure. So not child support related, but something new and different in a way to help. And so my last role with the state of Washington, I was the grant manager over the BICS evaluation grant. That was the federal Section 1115 grant that involved behavioral economics. And I did that for about 4 years. And then I left the state of Washington because we moved actually to the state of Utah, where I'm coming to you from now, and went to work with the state of Utah in child welfare. So something different, and did that for just about a year before child support came knocking and back into my life. Because once you're in it, it's hard to get out with the community and the connections that there are. So I came back to child support with Public Knowledge, and that was about 2.5 years ago. So with Public Knowledge, I'm now our child support industry director. So using all those connections, Abe, speaking of those networks and how important they are, the connections within the child support community across the country that I got to really grow in my time with the state of Washington with that grant management role, where I got to work with OCSC across the country and get to know many people in the community and see the way work is done differently across the country was my big takeaway from that time. And so at Public Knowledge, I have the chance to do the same, see the impact child support services is having across the country and how it's done differently, what's working well, and to get to lead our team here within Public Knowledge and determining how we can best help the community, how we can best serve, and do the work we all love doing. We've all been there. We all love that shoulder to shoulder work is the phrase I've been using recently because that's the work we really enjoy doing and being close to it. And so now I'm excited for the future and continuing to see where the program goes and being a part of that. So thank you, Stacey.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing that, both of you. Abe, I'm wondering if on a more personal note, you'd be willing to share with us a little bit back to our season theme about change is kind of what principles or values shape how you approach change in your life. And that can be both professionally and personally.
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, I think it's being true to yourself and understanding the type of change that is required, right? Whether that's personal or professional. Personally, if you identify a change, you really have to understand how do you get to the end result and what obstacles are going to be in the way, but most importantly, what mental blocks are going to be in the way moving towards that change. And so I think that does translate over to being a leader as well in the change management sphere. Change is not as easy as sending an email or just telling staff we're doing things this way. You really have to understand the personal side of change and relate to folks and really be intentional with change. But also you have to be honest. So I think honesty is huge when it comes to change management. Some changes are great and some changes are not so great. And that is influenced really sometimes by outside factors. If a new law comes in that you have to change, there's really no and or ifs about it. And it could be negative to the program and how you do business. But that's okay. As long as you're honest with folks, explain the why of why we need to change and get them on board, then that's the best that we can do. But I think it all starts with honesty and not trying to deflect, anything away from, the positives or negatives about any change.
Matt, what about you? What principles or values shape how you approach change?
Yeah, change to me, I don't know if there's much more energizing to me than change, which I've been reflecting a lot on that and why and what in my background got me to this place. But if I've got any sense of buy-in and whatever the change is, like I'm all in, optimistic. If you tell me to move tomorrow, I'll move tomorrow. And so I think it's that optimism in me is really how I approach it, but also with that sense of collaboration and teamwork and others involved. I am very much one who wants to bounce ideas off somebody or a group of individuals, hoping to share that optimism and to move forward, right? Generally, I think change is a positive thing. And so if we can take it head on and go all in on it, I'm all for it all the time. So usually optimistic about change and enjoy it for some odd, satisfying reason.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm raising a bunch of children who are not in favor of change, which has been, I think, this will be my life's challenge. So I'm like, let's do it. And they're like, wait, what?
Mhm.
All right. Thank you guys both for sharing. So we're here today to talk a little bit and explore a little bit more about child support operational assessments and BPR, kind of how we look at and assess how things are going, how we identify what needs to change, and then how we make those changes, and how we might move kind of these programs shift from collection focus to family centered approach. Matt, I wondered if you could just start with kind of giving us an overview of what that looks like, what the project looks like, and kind of who are the key players that were involved and what role you may have played.
Yeah, in this specific project, and Abe, correct me if I misstate anything. We had been involved with San Joaquin prior with some work and some other training that we had done. And so we had got to know Abe and his staff and some of the processes through that. And then the conversation came about that there may be opportunities to look at several processes to see if there's something that could be done differently. I believe Abe and the team had this as a goal of theirs for some time, but we're really looking for some dedicated personnel that could dedicate time to it because it is a labor-intensive piece of work that's really got to take commitment and focus to do. At PK, we put a small but mighty team together to perfectly fill the needs there of our child support team, but also of we had one staff member who didn't have child support experience, had some of the technical skills we needed, and also that fresh perspective that was needed in the process to be able to clarify things where assumptions were being made throughout that process. So I served as our project manager, and we were on site with the San Joaquin DCSS staff for, I believe, a week or two on and off to conduct the work, and really worked shoulder to shoulder with Abe's staff as we looked at 10 different processes that they had. So we involved 10 different focus groups, 10 different sets of individuals to have their voices and their participation in the process. And it was a smooth and intense time that we got to spend with Abe and his team top to bottom, which was really rewarding for us.
Good. Well, Abe, tell us a little bit more about the team on your side and kind of what challenge were you trying to address by looking at this operational assessment?
Thankful for Matt and the team for coming out to San Joaquin County, specifically Stockton, for those 1 to 2 weeks. It was a lot of work, but it was very fruitful. And so really where this idea came from was how can we improve our business processes to become more efficient, but with the end result in basically improving the customer experience. And so it's hard for us to improve a customer experience if our own processes internally are not where they need to be, and they're not running to optimum level. And so the idea was with the issue of funding always hanging over our head in government, it's how can we do more with less? How can we do more and not hire additional staff? Because we always have to be mindful of how much money we expend in the program with how much money we actually bring in. And so with that being said, we did look at 10 processes, large processes, mind you, revolving around modification, various court processes, how to opening a case. And what we really wanted to do is, as an executive team and management team, we could have easily gone into a room and we could have said, this is how we do things here in this county. But I didn't want to take that approach. And I'm glad that Matt supported this and his team supported this, is we wanted staff who do the work to be involved in the project, be in the room developing these processes, because line staff are really the ones that know the details. They may have tips and tricks or different nuances that they deal with that management and leaders may not know about because we're not in the trenches. And so by including staff, one of our primary stakeholders, we were actually able to receive a really thorough assessment and had a ton of maps developed by Matt and his team. And it just really helped us narrow down where we want to focus our efforts on and where we want to gain efficiencies in our processes. So we're going down that road right now in terms of identifying and prioritizing. Well, we've already prioritized the assessment and where we want to focus our time. Now it's just allocating resources to those items that we want to improve, right? Time and resources are just huge in this industry, and they're always lacking, but we have to make time and find the time to make those a reality.
Yeah, I love that. Matt, how did the team work to kind of get the perspective of the caseworkers or the customers into this work?
Yeah, we were really diligent and intentional in the way we started the conversations with the group, from setting up the focus group individually, but also we had a larger kickoff meeting with the larger group of staff to let them know why we were there, right? There's questions we understand, like, okay, why is this group coming in here, like, inspecting our work? Are we doing something wrong? And being really clear that it's not that you're doing something wrong, but it's that there may be a process in place written down somewhere, but we want to know what's actually being done. Because oftentimes those things are more efficient, more effective, and work better for you. And you might be the only one doing it that way. So if we can share that and learn from it, now we can have the office doing it that way and be serving the parents better. And so we kicked it off with that kind of framework. Janelle Sullivan of the team, I remember we had her share a story with every group, and I'm going to tell it incorrectly, but it involves cooking a Christmas ham, and grandma has written this recipe down, and you have to cook it in this dish a square dish and it's this size, and then it's passed down year after year. And eventually somebody finally asked, like, why does it have to be this specific square dish? When in fact, it didn't really matter what dish you cooked it in. And just trying to find those pieces, what could be done without, what needed to be included, and where the expertise actually lied and who had it. And so with each group, we started by documenting the process, asking how it's done, how you actually do it, not how the manual tells you, not how the county or the state manual tells you, but how do you do it? What cheat sheets do you have on your own? And bringing everything to the table and having everybody participate. In that, we kept the groups pretty small. I want to say 5 to 15 so that people would feel comfortable sharing. And if we felt there was one person sharing, that was the red flag too of, are they the only ones who really know how to do this process, or is it another dynamic? And so really digging in with each group and drawing out visually for them what the process is, which I think is always enlightening, right? To see something on the board, they see how complicated their work is, right or wrong. Most of the time, there's reasons for all those steps, and we were there to really uncover if there was reasons to not do certain steps and how to cut some of these giant chains of processes down. And like many of our clients in the work we do, anytime we get groups of people together like that, sharing about what they do, there's always, I'm going to say, outsized impacts from that, just that carry forward, right? We've started the discussion, and then often, and from the feedback we hear, it continues, right? Long after we go, now the thoughts and the cogs in the brain get churning and turning, and ideas start coming almost immediately. And that's always really fun to see.
Yeah, that creativity continues after you leave. Yeah. I'm curious what kind of opportunities you guys found to streamline work or reduce administrative burden. And really, either of you, if you guys have anything in particular you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think on our end here, we found even the smallest little changes are making a big difference. And so I think what came out of the assessment for us happened, it wasn't necessarily the business process, it was the unwritten traditions, unwritten rules that were in place in the organization that we wrote down, and we were asking members of the leadership team, where did this come from? And folks could say, it's just always been done that way, or we don't know. And so it was nice to kind of say, okay, if this isn't working for whatever reason, there's no reason to do it, then let's not do it. Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of that unwritten rule, unwritten tradition. But I think for us, one of the things that we wanted to improve on, it was such a simple one, is our mail that was sent to certain participants. We were under the impression that specific mail, if we changed something in the child support system, a checkbox, that checkbox was working and it was reducing a certain amount of mail basically coming in or going out. Well, upon further review, that checkbox had no functionality in our system. And
Was
we
it one
found-
to like not send the mail and to send it by email instead? Is that essentially, or the
Yes.
it?
So essentially, it was a mailbox that this was basically an address for homeless folks, and so certain actions would take place. But contacting the state, they said, yeah, there's absolutely no functionality behind this checkbox, and so we were just doing something to do something because we thought there was a reason behind it when there really wasn't. But I think specifically for us, another example had to do with the review and adjustment process. Not everyone was asking both parties to see if they wanted to stipulate before going to court. And if we can get parents to stipulate before going to court, then it cuts down on the modification time frame by months, and it frees up court space on our court calendar, so we can hear other cases. But most importantly, people can get relief sooner as opposed to later. So for us, that was a really big deal. And there's a plethora of other items that we're looking at, and kind of just to kind of sidestep a little bit, what we've done as a leadership team is we've looked at the entire assessment, of course, and all the recommendations. I think there's a couple that we couldn't do just because we're not the owners of the system.
Mm-hmm.
But to that end, we can still inform state DCSS, hey, this is a change we would like. So we can move forward in that direction, those two items. But everything else we prioritize in terms of what is going to be an easy win for us, but provide us some maximum results. And so that's what we focused on primarily. And so what we're doing is we're focusing on 5 at a time, and we're assigning each one of those recommendations to a program manager who will then create a task force to look at that recommendation and determine whether or not if we can move forward, and if so, what changes need to be made to gain some efficiencies with that process. But for us, there's a lot going on. But the review and adjustment was huge, identifying a step in the process to start the stipulation conversation. I'm sure Matt probably has a couple as well that they identified during the sprints or the business process modeling portion.
I did have a couple that came to mind, and then Abe, you reminded me of additional ones like the mailroom, right? And the mailroom is a place I like to start, right? That's where a lot of the work starts and a lot of the work comes from. And it's a real tangible one, clearly, right? You have a piece of mail. What are you doing with it? And where is it going? And I think that's an easier thing for everybody to grasp, following this piece of mail and how it is virtual or electronic, and then it's printed and now it's electronic again, and cutting that type of waste out. So you reminded me of that one, Abe. And then I was also going to share kind of a broader lens we looked at, which is really looking at the processes through the family-centered approach, really looking at what is the impact on the parents that these processes are ultimately impacting. Who are the recipient? Who are the other end of these processes? And what's it look like from their perspective? That's one thing we didn't do this time around, was interview parents who were going through those processes. But we did our best as internally, but also with the staff in San Joaquin to try to think about those questions. And that brought up a lot of great conversations. And because it's so easy in our work to just do the task in front of you and move on, right? Without giving much thought of what's my parent on this case? How are they impacted by what I just did? And so having that perspective throughout was really, really important to us. And to wrap up, or towards the end of the work, we did some envision sessions with the staff that really focused on that question. If we could design this process anyway, if we had the magic wand, if it was your dream, what would this process look like from those parents' perspective? Like, what would it be? And of course, as you can imagine, they're a much more linear process. If we were to map it out, much more simple. And then trying to ultimately adapt that into something that was realistic and doable with the system, with this procedure, with this system that we have.
And I think, I'd like to add that one of something that was surprising to me is when I first started, I was always on the phone calling folks, okay, child support is due. What can we do to assist you to make a payment? What's going on, etc. But one of the things that the assessment brought up was that our caseworkers were not necessarily comfortable in picking up the phone and having those conversations. And I don't think it's because they don't want to, it's because maybe the skill set isn't there. And a lot of our staff are new for the most part, less than 5 years experience. And so it can be very daunting having a conversation with somebody, asking them, when are you going to make a payment? Or how can I help you? Things of that nature. And, 4 or 5 years ago, we were in COVID. And so communication just really kind of dropped off, right? That personal communication really dropped off, that face-to-face. And so I really identified a training need for us in terms of we need to go ahead and invest in some training, communication training on how to deal or how to ask questions so we can help our customers, right? Because we want our customers to be successful, whether they're a parent that has a child, custodial party, or the non-custodial parent. And so that was something that was really eye-opening to me. It's a small thing, but it has a big impact. It's not necessarily a process, but we need to communicate effectively to really understand our customers. And I think something else that we're currently working on as well is developing an interview checklist that we didn't necessarily have in place. Or maybe some folks had it, some folks didn't. And so really when we're opening a case, we need to make sure that we are asking the right questions. And so we're getting all the right information to successfully open the case, because the more information you have, and when you open a case, the more successful the case is likely to be. So it's making sure that we're asking the same questions consistently across the board. So we're setting up the future of the case. There's so many other recommendations that I'm looking at right now in front of me. There's so many. Some are short term, some are long term. And one last thing that I'll bring up, and I think this is maybe common to other organizations, is we identified a few folks that are responsible for doing something very important, but they're the only ones that know how to do it.
Yeah, your single point of failure.
Yes, exactly. Very thankful that they are the SMEs and they know how to do it. But as a leader, right, as an administrator, we need to make sure that others know how that process works. And so essentially, how do we cross-train folks across the organization? And this assessment really helped us identify certain areas where that needs to occur.
I love it. You're hitting on kind of where I was headed, because I think often we think of change very linear, and I think it used to be a lot more linear, where you'd have like one big change, you plan for it and you execute it, and then you move on to the next change. And things are evolving so quickly right now, and things change and you have to pivot. So are there any other areas where you felt like you had to pivot or rethink it? You talked about the training for communication and about some cross training. Were there any other areas that you guys uncovered?
Yeah, I think something for us, we have a lot of tools in our tool belt here in the agency, and we have about 170, 175 staff here. And so it can be a bit daunting to make sure that everyone has what they need. For the most part, everyone does, but there are certain tools, say locate tools, that not everybody may have access to. And so if folks don't know that others have access to a specific tool, whether it be locate or something else, then they don't know that's a resource. And that can really hamper someone from being successful in moving the case forward. But I think in the end, as we talk about change, we've really been changing the culture here in San Joaquin County, and not just processes and procedures, but really the goal behind it is how can we help our families even more? And so I think for me, that is key as we messaged out this project, as Matt alluded to earlier a few questions ago. It's not looking at someone's work and saying, oh, that's bad. It's no, help us understand how we can help you. What roadblocks do you have? What resources do you need? What skill set do we need to work on? And so through this assessment, we've identified that. We've identified, like I said, the skill set of communicating with folks over the phone, in person, understanding the resource needs in terms of how to move a case forward. But also, it's also working with one another here in the office as well, because we did identify other areas where there were certain processes that certain teams were using that others were not using, or someone had a great shortcut and didn't know about it, and so it's just, it was a really good catch-all for us. But yeah, I think, so far we have a ways to go, but we're going towards the right direction.
Matt, any areas that you can think of where you had to pivot or rethink their approach, either our team or the San Joaquin team?
No, I think internally that we had a bit of a pivot. As Abe mentioned, a lot of the staff there are new and came on at a time where people were working from home. So internally, hard to collaborate, right? Hard to learn from over the cubicle wall. And realizing that there is a need for staff and everybody to have that large picture of what was going on in their work and how their work related to somebody else's work and somebody else's work. And so being able to visualize the work they were doing in the process, and then also imagining what the impact was with the work they were having. And they mentioned it and said it really, really well as far as removing the roadblocks for them in their work so that they have time to think about the impact of their work on the families, so that then they can make a best decision about what action to take, whether that is picking up the phone, which is often should be the first thing to turn to, and helping them to understand that, have the confidence around that and the tools to do that. So I'm thrilled that that's continued to be a emphasis, and they continue to get tools to be able to do that. So I think that's a key, and that is somewhere that we had to pivot in our understanding as we came in.
Abe, is there something that you guys are watching, either you or your executive team, or measuring to ensure that the recommendations and the work that you're doing is having the impact that you wanted it to have?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the ones that we're keeping an eye on are our stipulations. How many are we receiving compared to previous years? And I will say that just before, it was right after the assessment, we did have public knowledge come out and provide collaborative negotiations training. And so we actually have seen an increase in stipulations come through the doors, both from case managers to attorneys. And so that's been really positive for us. But for us here, we try to, whenever we make a change, we try to see if we can have a report behind it. Because for us, data really tells a story. And so we're not in the habit of just making a change to make a change and anecdotally saying, yeah, this feels right. We need to see the data because the data should be driving the decisions in our organization. And oftentimes, what we find is, yes, we have the data, but maybe we need to refine what we're looking for, or we need to measure or track this differently. And then from there, we typically adjust our process. And so with any organization, I think continuous improvement is always going to be top of mind. If something is working great, how can we make it better? And so just with any process, we try to look at data to support our projects, any of the changes that were recommended by public knowledge.
Matt, are there any other things that you think some of our other clients are looking at or watching or measuring to see if it has changed? I mean, obviously, I think some of the high ones that we've talked about or I can think of is saving staff time, right? Or making things go faster. Are there any other common ones that you're seeing?
I think those are definitely the main ones, right? That we think of. And they mentioned a really important one, and that's those stipulations or those agreed orders that take action by the child support staff to really make those happen more often.
Good.
Trying to think of additional ones, Stacey, but I think those really are kind of the key ones that come to mind.
Perfect. All right. Well, before we conclude, I'd like to just ask you guys a couple of questions about leadership and leading change. And I think that it's a hard part of the job, right? Is leading change as you're a leader. So the first question is just kind of what's your advice for leaders who are navigating the complexities of change in today's world and today's workforce? And Abe, if you don't mind taking that on first, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I can say in the child support program over the last few years and the next couple of years coming up, there has been and will continue to be a significant amount of change on how we do business. And one thing that I try to focus myself on when we're kind of dealing with all these complexities is communicating with staff and of course the exec team, but letting staff know that we understand their changes are coming. There's going to be more work. We're here to support you, and we're trying to identify new ways to help alleviate the workload, which is one of the reasons we brought public knowledge in. Exactly one of the reasons is how do we improve our efficiency with all the changes coming on board? But also letting them know that along the way, we're going to be working with staff and include them in the conversation so they don't feel left behind and they understand that we have blind spots as managers and leaders, and they're the ones that are going to catch us in our blind spots and let us know, yes, that will work. No, that won't work. So I think being collaborative is going to be key. But I think the last thing I want to say in terms of navigating complexities in the ever-changing child support program is having a vision to march towards. And it can be challenging to have a vision if there are always changes happening. But at the end of the day, one of the visions I think that a lot of directors have is how do we support families in the community? And I think if you have that essentially as being the number one goal, everything else will fall in place. But you have to have a strong vision in order for staff to understand where we're going. And so I think that would leave it there on that question.
Matt, anything that you'd like to share about navigating change in today's world?
Yeah, as I've thought about that question and having a couple of young kids, it makes me think of this too, but being present, right? Being when we're in a meeting, change is happening, being present, right? Throughout the life of the change, being present. Because I think that allows you to do all those things Abe mentioned. Being able to clearly communicate because you know what needs to be communicated, which allows for that psychological safety to occur and everybody to know what's happening and being really clear with what's going on. Abe worded it as having a vision. I have thought about this as just really communicating that purpose, right? Because I think through change, we may not always understand the change or why, but especially within child support, we know our purpose. We know our ultimate goals and what we're here to do and support. And we believe, we've seen how it can best be done. And so focusing on that purpose, I think, is really key. And then communicating that. And I really like the idea of coming back to what I started with, just being present, right? Always being there and available. So you know what's going on and how to best support those you're leading.
Good. And then my last question today is just how can leaders empower their teams to kind of innovate and adapt, right? In times of uncertainty or times of change and chaos, kind of how do you empower people to take the reins and keep driving?
I'll start this one. This is a hard one for me because I talked about my optimism for change and how I kind of drive towards it. So this is a hard one for me, but delegating that authority throughout it, right? So I'm not the only one kind of breaking that headwind, right? Delegating that authority so there's others along with me who are involved and as invested as I am in that change. And I think that then trickles down, right? More voices involved, more voices who have heard exactly why and how this change is occurring so that they can support me as a leader in the change and have more people hear and understand what is exactly going on. And then trusting that that process is going to happen and trusting in their expertise and professionalism to carry out the work as well. And likely better than I would. So
Thanks, Matt. What about you, Abe?
Yeah, Matt, that's a great response to that question. And I would add that I think what I would tell folks is it's okay to fail fast, fail early, especially when you have to adapt. Sometimes failing quickly is beneficial to an organization so you can continuously improve, right? We did that. Let's try something different. But also it's acknowledging that there is uncertainty in our organization or in the industry, and that is okay. Like I said before, we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's never truer than our current state of the program. And I think it opens up a door. My final point here is, in times of uncertainty, you can really rely and encourage collaboration, because if multiple people are feeling this way, they're uncertain about what's happening in the program, that's all of us. It's no one's alone in that boat. And so if we, all pick up an oar and row together and collaborate, we'll be in a better place. We'll get to where we need to be. So collaboration, not being afraid to fail, and acknowledging the times of uncertainty are key.
Yeah, failing fast is an important one, and getting people comfortable with failure is important too. So I'm glad you brought that up. All right. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you both for sharing today and joining me. It's been really inspiring to hear about what you guys are doing in the child support program to create some change. So can't thank you enough. It's been a privilege to be here with you today to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time.